Okay, we are live.
All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning we are going to be learning a lot about beavers. And with that, we welcome a number of people from the Fish and Wildlife Department.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is John Austin. I'm the Director of the Wildlife Division with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Nice to see all of you again. I appreciate the opportunity for some of our experts to share with you information regarding beaver ecology and some of our beaver and wetland conservation programs. So with us this morning is Brian Furphy. Brian is a wildlife biologist with the department and, among other things, oversees our fur bearer management and conservation program. And also Mr. Will Duane. Mr. Duane is our land acquisition coordinator, and amongst the myriad responsibilities that he has, he's responsible for our wetland conservation and restoration program, which has some very broad-reaching benefits for beavers and other wetland-dependent wildlife, and all of the other attendant benefits that our wetland conservation work provides. So I'll turn it over to Brian to begin, and then Mr. Duane will present, and then it'll be an opportunity for questions. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. You're up, Brian.
All right. Good morning. For the record, I am Brian Furphy, the Fur Bearer Project Leader for the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you for allowing me to testify today, and I hope this information is helpful to the committee. Apologies that I can't be there in person. I hear that the roads are quite slippery. I do want to share my presentation, but it looks like I can't. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Ready now, I think. There might be a delay, but it's been enabled.
Okay, let's see here. All right. Can everyone see that?
Can.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So just to orient everybody in the committee, what the Fish and Wildlife Department does, we've got a very broad mission. We have a range of strategies for accomplishing our mission. We tackle conservation and management issues for entire natural communities, all the way to individual woodlots. And we address conservation needs for entire ecosystems, all the way down to the needs of individual species. Beavers are a keystone species. I'm sure you've heard of the saying that beavers are ecosystem engineers. That's because they create wetlands. Beaver dams, they can start the base of the food web. So by blocking the flow of water, they can significantly alter the local hydrology, creating slower and deeper moving water that benefits many aquatic organisms. These changes increases biodiversity in the area, so it benefits all sorts of different species, everything from phytoplankton, which is algae, to invertebrates, birds, and even mammals. For example, research has shown 92 different species of birds that are found in 4 different wetlands. So that's pretty significant. So in addition to increasing biodiversity, beaver-created wetlands...
It looks like your slides are not advancing.
Oh, weird. Just a second. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, and thanks.
Okay. So in addition to increasing biodiversity, beaver-created wetlands also help with water purification, groundwater recharge, and erosion control. They're also a filter for aquatic habitats. And dams slow the flow of water by helping to lessen the impacts of drought by storing water and recharging groundwater. And they can also mitigate the erosion downstream during periods of heavy rain. So a little bit about beaver biology. So beaver are clumsy, they're humpbacked animals. They're not great at walking on land, although they will. They rarely ever leave the water, and they're adapted for living in the water. They're torpedo shaped, they've got webbed hind feet, and they have a flattened tail that make them very efficient for swimming. They also have a transparent membrane on their eye that allows them to see underwater. They have a nose and ear channels that close when they dive underwater, which is very efficient for them. And they also have fur-lined lips that close behind their incisors for cold water swimming. They can exchange as much as 75% of air in their lungs, and in comparison, humans can exchange 15%. So beavers can stay underwater for approximately 15 minutes. They eat the Cambrian layers of bark, so this includes willows and aspens, alders, birch, etc. And then in the summer, they also eat aquatic vegetation, so lily tubers, as well as cattails, leaves, and so forth. And here's a fun video that I wanted to share. Hopefully you hear the noise, maybe not, but if you don't like nails on a chalkboard, this might raise the hair on the back of your neck a little bit. If you can't hear the sound, no big deal, but this is a beaver that's taking down a tree to do its job, to build a dam. Okay, so beavers build lodges. Oops. Beavers build lodges or bank dens. They have multiple layers with multiple entrances, and this is for the purposes of predators. They have a food cache that they build to survive the winter. Their territory is about a half-mile. Interesting little information there. And a colony, or what we call a colony, which is a group of beavers that live in the wetlands. It consists of 2 juveniles, 2 adults, and 2 to 4 kits that are born each year. The 2-year-old juveniles are kicked out of the beaver pond in the spring on the arrival of the new kits. And they can live up to 8 to 10 years, and they're sexually mature at 2 years of age. They are mating right now, so sometime in the between January and March. So hopefully, if anybody gets out there and sees some beavers, can all have this information stored in the back of your head. So when beavers move into an area, they build dams and they live there until they deplete all of the food resources. Then they abandon the site and move on to another location where they can find food. Without beavers maintaining the dam, it becomes porous and it retains less water. Over time, it reverts back to the habitat that it originally was. And what's left behind is exposed sediment that's incredibly rich with nutrients. So when Europeans first landed in the New World, Native Americans had tools that the Europeans wanted and vice versa. So there was a very efficient trade system that was occurring during this time. So furs became their currency for getting the tools that either party wanted. So for example, 10 beaver pelts would buy 1 gun. And so during this time, the trading of beaver pelts was highly unregulated, and that was the demise of beavers in North America. Many of our modern day towns and cities actually were formed or got their start as fur trading outposts, and one of them is Windsor. But Albany, New York, and St. Louis were also trading posts as well. Beavers were gone from the landscape at least 100 years before Vermont was settled by people of European descent. And they were reintroduced from beavers in in Maine and New York in 1910, 1921 to 1937. They were protected in 1910. And surveys that were done shortly after they were reintroduced showed that in 1941, there was approximately 400 beaver or so in Vermont. And then a few years later, in 1944, there was approximately a little over 1,000. And then just a few years later, in 1949, we had 8,000 beavers. So this shows that the beaver population can grow rapidly in a short period of time. And especially without the natural predators that they once had. So, interestingly enough, many of our roads and infrastructure were built in the absence of beaver on the landscape. Vermont now has over 15,000 road miles in state and town right-of-ways, and there's 116 culverts and bridges in Vermont. So Vermont residents, businesses, they have an untold number of driveways, roadway miles, and these are all block barriers on the landscape to many of our water flows. The roads, they follow the streams and the wetlands, and this is the perfect mixture for human conflict with beavers. So the opportunities for conflict is very high. And flooding has been a big topic in our state recently. Beaver created wetlands, they can help with some of the seasonal flooding that we've been experiencing. The dams slow the flow of the water. It reduces stream velocity and it allows sediments to filter out. But they also serve a crucial role in allowing streams to access the floodplain. With the recent flooding, I'm sure everyone's curious. Dams were washed out, many of them were, and beavers were in everybody's backyards, but they're resilient and they went right back to work. So I wanted to introduce the committee to our program. That's the Beaver Wetland Conservation Project. Vermont's the only state that has such a well-established program to resolve beaver-related conflicts and help habitat. We also call it the Beaver Baffle Program. And the goal of the project is to maintain quality beaver-created wetland habitat. The project was established in 2000 and provides on-site technical assistance to landowners, road crews, and other municipalities to provide recommendations for resolving conflicts while also trying to maintain the wetland habitat. It is funded through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Grant and the Vermont Duck Stamp Funds, and also supplemented by PR funds, which is the Pittman-Robertson Act. And one of the documents that have been created from this program are the best management practices. And that was written in 2002 and is updated every few years. It's a resource to follow when dealing with problem beavers and to get agreements from all parties as to the appropriate management strategy. It also makes it a little bit easier and streamlined for understanding a lot of the wetland habitat and regulations. But generally, it discusses beaver biology, management techniques for resolving the conflicts, and the rules and regulations for wetlands specifically. So, what is a beaver baffle? So one of the non-lethal means that we have to responding to beaver complaints is installing beaver baffles. And what it is basically, it tricks the beaver. They hear the water flow and they go to fix it, but they can't. The water gets lowered from the beaver baffle to a desired level that they can't modify. And so to install it, you basically notch a dam to the depth that you want the water to be. You connect the pipe to the dam, and then on the other side of that pipe, there's a cage that you put into the water, and you usually try to get it to the deepest part of the water, minimum of 30 feet, but preferably 40 feet or more. And then you can use cinder blocks or other heavy materials to sink the pipe. And typically this method works. It's really interesting sometimes to see the beavers afterwards trying to go and modify the baffle or modify the dam to fix it and just really struggle to figure out why they're still hearing water flow. With beaver baffles and any other work that we do with resolving conflicts, so this includes also fences and culverts, the landowners or the towns are asked to contribute about 50% of the material cost of the materials. So Typically, this is people are happy to do so, and generally speaking, I would say that it's a very effective method for resolving many of the concerns that landowners have. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in all conflict situations. So, when we receive a complaint, we do site evaluations, and the first question we ask is whether or not it's going to positively influence the wetlands that beavers have created. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to put resources into a site that will not influence the habitat. So in that case, if it doesn't seem to be a good part of our time, people are generally referred to private contractors who can install similar devices if they still want to coexist with the beavers and not have them removed. Devices can fail in a number of ways, but the most common ways is that beavers might figure it out. They may figure out the device and prevent it from working, or we might have a high water event that washes it out. In certain locations, and again, this is part of the entire site evaluation of trying to figure out whether or not it's worth putting a baffle in. The dams or the beavers may go and try to dam upstream or downstream of the baffle, and so that can prevent the device from continuing to function. And yeah, it depends on the site layout, and it weighs into the decision of whether or not to install the device. It can get expensive to install multiple devices on a single property. So if they're continuing to dam upstream or downstream, one of the solutions is, well, why don't we just, do another beaver baffle? But that's challenging in a single wetland, just because if one device fails, then they all fail. And a good example of this is that on West Mountain Wildlife Management Area recently, or over the last decade or so, we spent $225,000 on damages associated with from one plugged culvert on that was blown out several times with 3 baffles over the years. And so those are dirt roads that had to continuously get worked on. So in those situations, it's not realistic or worthwhile for the program to invest in these sites. And like I said earlier, if landowners are still interested in pursuing a baffle, we refer them to a private contractor. So also on occasion, beaver will also they'll abandon the site after the device has been installed if they don't like the lower water level. We also take this into consideration while installing a baffle. We work with the landowner and we try to satisfy their needs, but also take into account what the beavers will need to continue to live at the site. And just to show a little bit on what the project deals with, the large majority is private infrastructure and public infrastructure. So each year we get an average of 400 calls or emails that are regarding beaver activity and associated conflicts. Each year we do an average of approximately 50 site visits. And the 1/3 of the time results in beaver baffle installations or fencing and culverts. And only 1/5 of the time we're actually recommending to trap the beaver in season. So a large majority of this project is actually working with landowners to resolve their needs in a non-lethal manner. So device installations, this is a great map. It shows you where device installations have occurred over the last decade or so, or more than that, across the state. And you can see that the device installations are widely distributed. Some areas they're denser than others, but it shows where the impact that beavers might be having on the landscape and where people are experiencing problems. So 341 total installations have been installed as of December 2023, and that's influenced over 37 acres of wetland habitat. And each year around 100 devices continue to function. They continue to influence approximately 1,200 acres of wetlands. And beaver activity, of course, it changes over time. Remember, the wetlands that they create are cyclic. And we will salvage baffles from sites where they're no longer working or where they're no longer needed. And we typically install approximately 15 beaver baffles per year. And just this last slide here, what we know about their distribution and abundance. So you can see here that the majority of the complaints that we're responding to, again, is well distributed across the state. And this is a map that shows just 1 year of doing site visits. And it is directly correlated with the amount of harvest that we have and the amount of beaver baffle devices that we have on the landscape. So the areas that are in darker colors are the areas where we have to visit more frequently over time. And the areas that are in green are areas that we don't visit as often and don't have as many beaver issues. So this goes to show that they are incredibly abundant across Vermont's landscape. They continue to be abundant, and that they're well distributed across the state. So with that, I wanted to open it up to any questions that the committee might have about beavers and the work that we do.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members have questions? Representative Bartholomew and then Norris.
You said how long did you say they could stay underwater?
For 15 minutes.
1-5?
Yes.
Okay. And then there was one picture with the ice. So this time of year, there's a lot of ice. How do they breathe where do they go to get air?
So they actually, in the beaver hut itself, they have an air chamber or multiple air chambers. So they can leave underneath the ice. And because they have underwater tunnels that allow them to get into their hut. And so they'll go and visit their food cache and then go back up into their hunt. And so they can breathe both underwater and in their hut. And the way to tell if a beaver pond is active this time of year is that you'll see little areas in the ponds that are not iced over that they're using basically to get air or to get from one place to another. So if you see a pond that has a hut on it that's completely frozen over, it could be that beaver pond is not active.
Representative Norris.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of questions on costs. What's the total cost of the Beaver Wetland Conservation Program on an annual basis, including all the staffing and administration?
I would have to look up that number and get back to you on that. I know that the funding itself is not limiting our ability to install any of the baffles or to do any of the site visits. But for an exact number, I would have to look that up and get back to you.
Okay, I'd appreciate you getting back to me on that. That would be great. Also, what is the approximate cost of, I think you gave a $225,000 number. I think that was an unusually high number. What's kind of the average cost of the installation of a beaver baffle?
Oof, that I would also have to get back to you on and consult with our staff to see how much materials generally cost. I know that the cost has been increasing due to the economy and the cost of materials generally. So yeah, I mean, in situations where we can salvage the materials when a beaver baffle fails or if they abandon the site, that's often very helpful, but it will cost, it is increasing in cost as time goes on. But I would have to
I'm interested in not just the cost of the materials, but the cost of the labor and the administration, the total cost.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up and get you a figure at another time. I'll let you know later on today.
Thank you, Brianna. Appreciate that.
Sure.
I see a couple other members, but I'm going to step in for a second. Just, about your previous slide, right before this one, with the map of says what we know about their distribution and abundance. It looks like you're taking a 1-year snapshot of problem reports and then extrapolating beaver abundance from that. Is there some other piece of data that I'm missing here, or It seems like
Sure.
a stretch.
Yeah, so this is just an example of 1 year of responding to conflicts, right? So you're correct in that arena. So in the previous map where devices are installed, this is really a better graphic of really the distribution and abundance of beaver since 2000. So again, you can see that they're widely distributed across the state. We do have maps that we can create that shows the harvest distribution in the state. And I can tell you that the areas where we have the most beaver complaints are also the areas where we have the highest harvest, which is also the areas that have the best habitat to support beavers. So so the Winooski area and also the Otter River that or Otter Creek area are areas where the beaver density is generally the highest.
But you're basing that on human encounters with the beavers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems like a proxy. And I guess I just want to make sure I heard you right. You have the highest number of complaints in the areas where you also have the highest number of beavers trapped and killed.
That's correct. Yeah. So generally where beaver density is the highest is where the largest amount of harvest occurs. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that trappers are trapping pretty close to roads. They're not going terribly far from the roadside. And usually it's juveniles being caught, and those are the ones that are creating the most problems. So yeah, so you are correct in that a lot of this is human interactions with beaver, but we currently do not have the funding to do any sort of statewide population density estimate. But we do know that over time that the population is high, and it may even be increasing.
Great, thank you. Representative Tagliavia.
One of the questions I had, I think you just answered, the population is growing, did I hear, despite the trapping and the beaver baffles being installed, is that correct?
That's right. So it's stable to potentially increasing. And yeah, so they can, as you saw earlier in the 1940s, they can reproduce fast. And they're doing really well here in Vermont. And yeah, their population is well saturated across the landscape.
Can you tell me, is there a backlog of people looking to have beaver baffles installed?
This time of year, we're not receiving as many calls. So usually in like April to May is when it starts to pick up. And yeah, I mean, 400 people are calling from April to May all the way into November. So we stayed pretty busy during that time. And whether or not there's a backlog, generally when we receive a call, we try to figure out, okay, is this a site that's worth evaluating, or is this a site that we can talk to the landowner over the phone? So for example, if it's like a small pond in somebody's backyard, a lot of times we can resolve the issue with just talking to the person over the phone, sometimes meeting with them in person, but we can also share a lot of resources too that save some time.
Thank you.
Representative Austin, did you have your hand up?
I did. So across the street from where I live, there's a bike path with a chain link fence along the bike path, and across the chain link fence is a beaver pond. And the dam is built in front of a huge culvert from the town. And I feel like it's a secret beaver pond, and like I'm worried the town will find out about it. I'm on the planning commission too, so I probably should like mention it, but I'm just wondering, I just don't want to show up one day and the beavers are gone. What are the regulations, or what should I do to make sure it turns out right? Because it is in front of a huge culvert, the dam.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think all of us have the experience of seeing beaver wetlands and beavers, and it's exciting and it's fun to watch them. I have one area that I run by that I've enjoyed watching the beavers develop, so I get it. But yeah, I think there's it depends on whether or not they start having an issue. So if they start plugging up that culvert and the town is having an issue with that and it's causing flooding on the road, you can't exactly like remove the debris from the culvert and expect that to work, because a lot of times the beaver will just replug the culvert probably within 24 to 48 hours. So there are solutions again for non-lethally resolving the conflict if the site actually can support it. So again, you can install a beaver baffle, and that's a non-lethal way to resolve the issue. You can also do fencing around the culvert, and that is also a very effective way to resolve just general culvert issues. And I will say that even if down the line, if there ever were trapping or lethal removal of beaver, it's likely that the beaver could potentially come back if the habitat is good enough. So they're trying to find areas where there's good food resources, and they will actually eat themselves out of an area. And you can see this well on Google Maps, actually, where you can look at all the beaver ponds and historic beaver ponds, and some of them you could see that there's no longer any hardwoods for them to eat. And so in those situations, it's no longer suitable habitat for the beavers because they have no more food to eat. So typically they'll move on to another spot. So as long as there's food resources and the habitat's there, it will support beavers.
Thank you. I was wondering about, they may reproduce rapidly, but is anyone sort of tracking, or have they looked at the genetic diversity of the populations that we have? If they were reintroduced from just a few beavers, are they kind of all related? And is that a problem?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. There hasn't been any genetic studies in Vermont specifically that I know about. But it's something that, of course, we would take into consideration in the resilience of a population, especially with small populations. But I imagine with the amount of movement that we have on the landscape, that they're genetically robust. We haven't been seeing any abnormalities or any detriments to any sort of breeding efforts that they have. The only things that have come up are small things like maybe pox that have shown up on their tails. And most recently, we've heard about tick infestations in some areas that actually have a pretty high beaver density. And
what kind of infestation?
Tick.
Oh, ticks.
yeah, it's a black-legged tick. And it's specific to beavers and muskrat in particular. So those ticks, actually, the animals that are most infested with those ticks are in really poor condition. But they're also in areas where it's oversaturated with beavers. But to answer your question about the genetic diversity, I really don't know. But I think again, it would take some funding to do a study if that was a top priority.
Representative Sakowicz.
Yeah, do we have an estimate of how many beavers are in Vermont?
We don't have an estimate of how many beavers are in Vermont. What's really valuable to look at is really just their abundance and distribution across the state. And so if we're seeing that they're continuously occupying all of our watersheds across the state, it's not necessarily, a population number is not going to give us as much information or valuable information as much as understanding how much they're occupying habitat across the state. So it hasn't been a priority in this program. And, it would take funding and a statewide study to do so, to get an actual population estimate.
Representative Pritchard.
So do you have an idea? I guess you would need to kind of know the population to know this, but I'm interested in, are beavers at their carrying capacity? Are they exceeding their carrying capacity? And when they do exceed their carrying capacity, what integral parts are necessary to balance that?
That's a great question. I would say it depends on if we're talking about social carrying capacity or biological carrying capacity. Of course, we need to balance the needs of both and address how much tolerance we have for beavers on the landscape. But biological carrying capacity, I would say that we're at biological capacity, and that this population is, again, well saturated. And to answer your last question, what we would need to resolve that, I think, again, that's going to be a project that would require funding. A lot of this information is not straightforward, and they can be a difficult species to study because we can't necessarily set up like cameras like we can for other species, like terrestrial species. So there's a lot of information that we can get from techniques like cameras that can tell us that information. But again, these types of questions and projects are incredibly expensive, and we currently don't have the funding to do them.
How is the beaver's wellness affected, or any species, when it exceeds carrying capacity?
When it exceeds carrying capacity, we start to see issues that would exist, such as diseases that I was talking about earlier. You might see beaver-related diseases increasing, and this is all biological carrying capacity. And you might see, increases in tick infestations, for example. You'll see more interactions between beavers that are fighting, and you can easily see this in their pelts, where they'll have pretty big gashes in their pelts. So, I mean, it could be very detrimental to them, and not to mention the habitat. So if we've exceeded carrying capacity for beaver, that means that they're not going to have any food to eat, and we don't want that to happen, right? We don't want them to starve. And so if we start to tip the balance a little bit too much in that direction, they may starve themselves out. And so it's not that they will go extinct or they'll be extirpated. It's just that their numbers would be drastically reduced and they would suffer the consequences.
In my
We need to move on. I'm sorry. We have a whole other witness from this 1 hour segment with a lot more slides. So really appreciate you joining us. I mean, I don't want to, if the Fish and Wildlife Department wants to tell me differently, but there's more than half the slides remaining and only about 15 minutes, really. We need to be done by 5 minutes before the hour. Well, that's, yes, okay, please join us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Let's quickly get set up here.
No, just over.
Is it not a continuation of the same slide deck?
No, I have mine and
We have them joined on our wood because
Slides we didn't see all of them. And
I know they weren't quite as presented, but
updated set.
sure, if you would follow through with, I don't know who the keeper of their slide deck is, but
I'll take a look.
these were a little out of order with some different ones. And so that happens often, people, thinking about how they want to finally present.
sometimes we all make edits at 11 p.m.
Exactly.
Night before. Okay. Very good. Good morning, members. My name is Will Duane. I'm the land acquisition coordinator for the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. I work out of our Montpelier office just up the hill at National Life. It is my privilege to be the statewide point person for the department's land conservation and protection projects. I'm here today to talk a little bit about how we sort of implement what you've been hearing about. I know my colleagues Bob Zano and Jens Hilke were in recently to talk about Vermont conservation design, and piggybacking on what Bree was mentioning about beavers and all the benefits that come with the habitats they create. I wanted to highlight what the department is doing to be proactive and to try and meet this moment of shrinking biodiversity and climate change, flood events, and water quality issues that the state has. Just briefly on the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we are not perhaps as high profile as our sister Department of Forest, Parks and Rec and their public land holdings, but We have over 150 wildlife management areas and stream bank management areas statewide. If you look for us, see our little green signs. We've got over 100 years of public land ownership, and our current totals of acres that we hold out and hold in trust for the public are over 130,000 acres. The department is the single largest individual landowner of wetlands in the state of Vermont. And many of the reasons we conserve habitat and land are on the screen here, primarily wildlife habitat and public access to the resource, but more importantly, in recent years, water quality improvements and floods. We work closely with partners statewide to implement our projects, the Trust for Public Land, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, Vermont Land Trust, TNC, the Vermont Rivers Conservancy, the Conservation Fund. I could go on and on. But our water quality focused acquisitions are all about wetland and floodplain restoration. We acquire prior drained wetlands and restore them to wetland conditions. We are creating a net increase in wetlands across the state through our acquisition and protection processes. And just wanted to get right into the work that we do. What we're looking at on the screen here is an example of our recent efforts in the Brandon Swamp. Using the Vermont Duck Stamp Fund, we've acquired over 600 acres, about 400 of those acres in the last few years to increase public holdings in the Brandon Swamp area. The swamps along the Otter Creek going all the way out to Lake Champlain are the largest and most diverse swamp complex in the New York, New England region. It's been a priority for the department in the last few years to link up these swamp complexes. We know that during the flood events in 2023 and 2024, our acquired parcels here were taking on water when the rivers were high. The Otter Creek was dumping and storing this excess rainwater into Fish and Wildlife parcels. So meeting the intent for which we acquired them. For these particular acquisitions, we finance it all through the Vermont Duck Stamp Fund. These are stamps that waterfowl hunters in the state elect to add on to their license. Anyone who's hunting migratory waterfowl needs to have both a state and a federal duck stamp. To date, we have raised over $6 million through the duck stamp program. It's a runaway success story that is a critical funding component of us to acquire, restore, and conserve wetland habitat types. But it's not just aquatic systems that we try and link up. In this time of shrinking biodiversity, forest fragmentation, our goal as a department is to increase the ability for species to travel across the state. And to execute that vision, we have to do it on a smaller regional level. We need to make sure that they can get from conserved and secure habitats to other conserved and secure habitats. This is Bob Zano and Jens Hilke's main focus with the Staying Connected initiative and big components of Vermont conservation design. What we're looking at on the screen here is just an upland terrestrial component or an analog to what we were looking at on the previous screen down in the Brandon Swamps, right where Route 100 goes between two disjunct portions of Okemo State Forest. There's quite a bit of development, forest fragmentation, and habitat loss. The two parcels on the west side of the screen here we acquired back in 2022, created the Owasos WMA. It's a 450-acre wildlife management area that links portions of Okemo State Forest. The small highlighted portion on the screen there right in the center is a 12-acre acquisition that we just completed right along Route 100 in Andover. We funded these projects with generous support from the Mount Holly Conservation Trust, but also with funding set aside from the last industrial wind project in Vermont, the Iberdrola project down in Deerfield. There was a pretty substantial mitigation fund set aside for this type of habitat work. So, you know, we certainly work in the wetlands, try and enhance and create habitats like Bree was describing in the beaver realm, but we also work in high elevations in the Green Mountains to try and facilitate the flow of larger species, black bears, moose, deer, through this incredibly important wildlife corridor. And then an example of a recent project where we are linking both wetland and upland type projects. What we're looking at in yellow is a 350-acre addition to our Otter Creek WMA. On the west side, just off the screen, is the Taconic Mountains. You've got Route 7, then the Otter Creek, and then the Green Mountains start up again in green there, the Appalachian Trail visible on the east side. Going from the Taconics down to the river bottom, or the river valley bottom, and up to the Green Mountains. Just another example of this biodiversity corridor that we are trying to create to get that genetic diversity in the species that the chair was asking about. We need to ensure that there is a free flow of species to get from one portion of the state to the other. This particular project, a great success story working with the Vermont Rivers Conservancy, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and the Trust for Public Land. More recently, we are working on a lot of flood buyouts. The recent flooding in 2023 and 2024 has allowed us to be a little more strategic in the riparian parcels that we acquire. What we're looking at on the screen here is in addition to actually the creation of the Upper Missisquoi Wildlife Management Area in Troy. These were the farm fields that were continuously flooded, and farmers in the area spending a lot of money on planting crops that didn't bear out in fruit. More recently, we've been working with towns all up and down the Lamoille River to acquire parcels that are eligible for FEMA buyouts. One of the great roles that the Department of Fish and Wildlife can play is to be the ultimate landowner, whereas a lot of conservation organizations cannot. Typically, the default setting for a FEMA buyout is that the municipality takes control of the parcel. Towns typically don't have the staff to manage those or take care of those types of projects. In many instances, these flooded parcels are directly adjacent to existing fish and wildlife stream bank management areas. So it's a logical fit for us. We have the staff, the expertise, and though our pilot payments aren't always the same as municipal tax rates, we do pay a little bit of income tax or property taxes that the towns wouldn't otherwise see. Working with FEMA and Vermont Emergency Management, we have 2 buyouts that we're a part of in Morrisville, one in Wolcott, and working on a few in Hardwick. So all up and down the Lamoille River. And then one of our most successful programs to date, this has been going for about the last 7 years, is a pretty substantial grant we get annually from the US EPA. This is all about wetland restoration in the Lake Champlain Basin. It's a direct result of the 2016 TMDL to lower nutrient loads, specifically phosphorus in the Lake Champlain Basin. But we're using this funding source, again, to create a net increase in wetlands statewide, trying to do our best to proactively create those same habitat types that beavers do that benefit all of the species in Vermont. What we're looking at on the screen here is the former Fitzgerald Farm in Colchester. It's a big thumb that sticks right out into the river, and you can just imagine with annual flooding how the water shoots from east to west across those fields and inundates it. The farmers were repeatedly having issues with getting harvested crops in those fields. And through our EPA wetland restoration program, we're able to acquire prior drained ag lands, revert them back to their wetland functions, create biodiversity, but almost as important, create new public access points, especially in high population areas. This is like a 10 out of 10 for us. This checks all the boxes of the mission of the department and our land acquisition program.
Where's that?
Sometimes called Pine Island. It's in our Intervale WMA picture. Oh, right here, Colchester, right here, the 2 sections of the town. The Ethan Allen Homestead is just across the river here.
Wetland is in the black and white little.
Yes,
Right.
Basically, this entire 100-acre thumb that sticks out into the river. A few more flood events and this would become an oxbow.
I think the question is, it's outlined in black and white on the right.
Oh, pardon me, yes.
Right, yeah.
Just some examples of that farm we were looking at on the previous screen. Annual flooding that makes it pretty inhospitable for agriculture. Another example of our wetland restoration efforts, this is at the Lemon Fair WMA. This particular parcel is in the towns of Bridport and Cornwall. Everything in red on the left-hand side of the screen is a GIS mapping layer we use. It's the wetland restoration potential layer. When it lights up like that, we know that there is good wetland values that can be achieved on a parcel. Typically, there's substantial agricultural ditching, which you can see with those straight lines on there. So working with the biologists and the professional staff at the department, we identify sites where there could be good wetland restoration outcomes. We only work with willing landowners, always. That's a key thing to mention. But right here at the Lemon Fair, where it is an impaired river, we had a landowner who was interested in enrolling in the USDA Wetland Reserve Easement Program. Again, the Department of Fish and Wildlife can play the role as the ultimate landowner steward here to affect those wetland restoration outcomes. Another great success story working with our partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA NRCS. Another example in Addison County here at our Dead Creek Wildlife Management Area. This is in Panton. As you see on the right side of the screen, that's that same wetland restoration layer that we use to scope and identify and prioritize projects. Again, when we can remove agricultural inputs to a parcel, let it naturally revegetate, using some human manipulation to impound water in certain areas, creating habitat for mammals, but also migratory waterfowl, we can restore sometimes up to 99% of a parcel back to its original wetland functions. Again, all in an effort to help filter those nutrients that otherwise would be shooting right into the Lake Champlain watershed. Up in the Northeast Kingdom, this is an example of a project we've been working on. We just completed these acquisitions, put a press release out yesterday, in fact, 6 recent acquisitions along Johns River in the Memphremagog watershed, highlighting some of the funding we received from the Great Lakes Fisheries Coalition. We're creating public access. Our stream bank management areas allow folks to have access to the rivers for wildlife-based recreation, primarily angling. But we implement buffers, remove any agricultural inputs that are on there, and revert the habitats back to their original wetland functions. This has been a great success story up in the Northeast Kingdom. We've just completed. We're hoping to do more of the same. And then finally, just wanted to give a shout out to a few of our funding programs which help us get these things done. The Vermont Duck Stamp Program, the first stamp was released back in 1986. Again, hunters, when they get their annual waterfowl license, they have to have a state tag and a federal tag. Through license sales and accumulated interest in our fund, we've raised over $6 million for conservation projects. We don't use this for any staff time. It only goes into implementing conservation projects. We've secured over 12,000 acres, over 100 projects using this fund. And again, just wanted to focus on our wetland restoration project from the US EPA. Those funds are granted from the federal government to the Lake Champlain Basin Program. So they are, in theory, in hand, can't be removed. They are available to us to continue using for at least a few years, the next few fiscal years. And then finally, highlighting a few additional funding sources and collaborations that we have that we don't necessarily have the time to go into, but our mainline funding, as Bree mentioned before, is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Pittman-Robertson Act. It's an excise tax on outdoor equipment, firearms, ammunition. The VHCB is an incredible partner in the work that we do, often providing the non-federal funds that we need to draw down dollars from the federal programs we have access to. Ducks Unlimited, the Clean Water Board funds, private fundraising, of course, and then the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission I mentioned up in the Northeast Kingdom, primarily focused in the Memphremagog watershed. So that was a lot. I'm sorry, I tried to go through it quickly, but wanted to kind of give you the global view of what we're doing statewide to try and be as proactive as we can and meet the moment in this time of habitat fragmentation, loss of biodiversity. And these are what we'll be utilizing to meet the goals of Act 59 from the last biennium, which we're excited about.
Thanks for your presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. We have
Understood.
the next witness has joined and he's in Colorado and I want to respect his time.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Funding that's, it's duck stamps, it's limited population, people that are funding.